Hey, 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 everybody. Welcome to our very special Tim at 10 today. I am so incredibly excited for our topic today. It's one of my most favorite times of the year working in the early education and after school world. It's summertime. It's time to have some fun, go outside, take some field trips, really make those meaningful connections with the children, those fun and memorable times with the adults that you're with. Man, it's just such a magical experience right here. And I started working in after school programs in 1987. So it's been a long time ago. But some of my most favorite experiences working in this industry for all these years are field trips. Just such an incredible time. While they are also, while they are fun and exciting and the adults love them and the children's love them, they're also a lot of work and there's a lot of risk and liability involved in field trips and summer safety, taking children outside when it's hot, taking children out in public away from your program, especially in today's world. There's just a lot going on out there. So we must continuously focus on upgrading our skill set and keeping the children and the adults safe during these critical and exciting months. So that's what today's training is going to be all about. We're going to go over some standards and regulations that you are required to follow by child care regulations, and then we'll get into some tips and techniques to keep both the children and the adults safe and healthy during this summertime. Good morning to everyone that is popping on live. If you're joining us live today, welcome. Super glad that you're here and joining us live. I know that we've got several large groups that are watching this video together. That's always exciting, and I appreciate that. This is being recorded, so if you know someone that was unable to attend live, they can watch this recording later on, and they will still have the opportunity to interact with the instructor, so that is going to be there too. So please pass this information on to anyone that may need it or was unable to join us today. Before we get started, let's just go over some training tips so that we can make sure you have a successful experience with today's material. This training has been approved by the Texas Early Childhood Professional Development System, otherwise known as TechPEDS. So make sure that you have your personal TechPEDS ID. Make sure that is entered in your Tim the Trainer portal on our website before you complete your assessment at the end of the training. That way, once you complete your assessment, your certificate will automatically be uploaded into your TechPEDS account and will be verified. If you don't have a TechPEDS ID number, really easy to get that. When you go to our website, timthetrainer.com, and you go to your profile where you enter your name and the name of your school and your address and your phone number, where it asks for your TechPEDS ID, there's a little circle with a question mark. You can click on that. It will give you instructions and a link on how to set up your TechPEDS ID number. I strongly recommend that you do this and you start having all of your professional development in that database. It's going to be very important for you now and later on. Make sure that you take notes about the information that we are sharing today so that you can review this with your center director and other members of your leadership team, and then other individuals that are going to be, participating in summer activities and going on field trips. It's going to be really important that you have that collaborative relationship with all parties involved and that you're all on the same page. So take those notes, have those discussions, have those reflections, and always keep that open mind on how we can do better at keeping the children safe, keeping the adults safe, making sure everyone is accounted for, and that your summer activities and your field trips are successful. As always, if you have any questions about the material that's being discussed today, those of you that are participating live, you can ask your question in the comment section over here on Facebook. Please keep it brief though, since we got a group here. You can also message us on our website, timthetrainer.com. In the upper right hand corner, you can send me a message straight through our website, or you can call or you can email any questions that you have. Or if you need more information beyond the scope of the training material, we are here for you and we will respond in a timely manner. This meets all of the definitions for instructor-led training. Also, just keep in mind, not just for this training, but any training and professional development that you complete, Child Care Regulations does specify that your trainings must be completed in a reasonable amount of time. The easiest way I have found to define that is the total number of training hours that you complete in a single day cannot exceed the total number of hours that you worked in that day. Definitely, the total number of clock hours of training that you complete in a day cannot exceed the total number of hours there are in a day. That should be common sense, y'all. All right. But I just want to make sure everyone is in compliance with the standards and regulations and that you don't have any issues with your training certificates or your program does not have any issues with wage and hour laws. You're going to notice on each of the slides that there's a little blue box down there at the bottom of the screen. Those are going to be some questions about the material that's being covered on that slide. You might want to pay attention to those because you're going to see them again. At the end of this training, you're going to have the opportunity to complete an assessment so that you can get your certificate of completion to put in your training records. There is a fee to get your certificate of completion, but we will put that link in the comment section. It will also be on our website at the end of this live training. All right, so what are we going to learn today? What is this going to be all about right here? First thing we're going to focus on is understanding the child care regulations expectations for outdoor play, for field trips, and for transportation. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this particular training. All right. Now you're going to hear me refer a couple of times during this material to two different training topics that several of you are going to be required to also complete. We've got transportation safety training that is required by licensing, and we also have water safety training that is required by licensing. All right. But for this presentation today, we're going to focus on outdoor play, field trips, and transportation guidelines. All right. We also want to talk about supervision techniques in large group settings, especially when you are mixing with the public. We're going to talk about playground supervision for those of you that are staying on site, but we'll also talk about supervision techniques when you are leaving your premises and especially when your children are mixing with the public. All right. And lastly, we're going to focus on engagement techniques, how to keep your children engaged and safe when transporting them and when on field trips. So those are my objectives for the day, and there'll be a lot of other fun stuff that we'll talk about as we go through this material. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about in today's presentation are the expectations that are outlined in the Child Care Minimum Standards for Child Care Centers. Most of you should already be familiar with the Child Care Minimum Standards. You are required to know and comply with the Child Care Minimum Standards. Not only that, you're required to know and comply with the Child Care Minimum Standards. If you are aware of another employee who is not complying with the minimum standards, it is your responsibility to report that to the center director. All right? We have to encourage each other. We have to support each other. We have to hold each other accountable. So it's really important for you to know the standards and regulations, not just for yourself, but for the other adults around you. Everybody is required to follow the child care minimum standards. If your program is licensed or registered, all right, you're required to follow the minimum standards. So there's really no one that is exempt from this, whether you're a faith-based program, a nonprofit program, anything like that. If you're licensed, you're required to follow these rules. So that's why I think it's important for us to be able to go over these. Let's go ahead and get started. First off, I just want to focus on some terms and definitions. And obviously, I'm not showing you the entire booklet. I just kind of cut and paste the material that is relevant to today's topic, summer and field trip safety. But as we go through this training, it's going to be important for you to be familiar with certain terms and definitions that are outlined in the Child Care Minimum Standards. So first off, you're going to see body of water, all right? A body of water is exactly what it is. It's any body of water. Okay, now if we're talking sprinkler play, something like that, but there's no body of water, that's a little bit different right there. Certified lifeguard is a person who has been trained in life-saving and water safety by a qualified instructor and has some type of certificate of successful completion of training. So those of you that are taking children swimming, either at your facility or away from your facility, a certified lifeguard is required to be present. A field trip is defined as any activity conducted away from the child care center. So basically, if you leave your premises, all right, if you leave your premises, that is considered a field trip. Something that is new for us in 2025 is we do have some new rules on water safety guidelines. So this is going to be the very first summer that we have some of these new rules in place. I'll talk a little bit about those later on in today's session. But number 44 under terms and definitions, you'll see the definition of a personal flotation device. And that is a United States Coast Guard approved life jacket. All right, so just so you'll know when I talk about personal flotation devices, what that is right there. And then let's pay attention to the definition of a swimming pool, because once again, this is something that has recently changed. A swimming pool is an artificial body of water with a depth of more than 18 inches. And that's what has changed. Previously, a swimming pool was defined as 24 inches. They've lowered that, and now it's a body of water with more than 18 inches. So if you're using a wading pool, something like that, one of those round plastic pools you get from the retail store, if it has more than 18 inches of water, it's considered a swimming pool. All right, so you want to be really, really aware of that, especially if you're using equipment that has been previously purchased at your facility prior to this year. The rules are a little bit different. So we want to make sure everyone is in compliance and they understand that new definition right there. Moving on, when we talk about water activities, a water activity is different than a swimming pool. All right, a swimming pool is a body of water greater than 18 inches. All right, water activity is inclusive of swimming pools, wading pools, and sprinkler plays. So we are going to kind of talk about two different things right here when we talk about swimming versus when we talk about water activities. Those are a little bit different. Okay. Now, when we talk about a wading pool, you're going to see that a wading pool is a body of water that is less than 18 inches. So again, if you get the big round, swimming pools from the retail store, if it's less than 18 inches, that's going to be considered a wading pool. All right. So again, we'll kind of talk about these later on in the presentation, but just so that you'll understand the terms and definitions. That's what we're referring to right here. All right. You're also going to see in this bullet point right here, those of you that may have splash pads, some of you that might do sprinkler play, those type of things, that's going to fall under the wading pool category. It's not considered swimming, okay, because there's no body of water in those situations. Okay, just a little clarification right here. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but when we talk about written operational policies, you do need to have a policy on transportation if you are transporting children away from your program, so to and from a field trip in this scenario. You need to have a written policy on what that's going to look like. Water activities, so whether it's sprinkler play, splash pads, swimming, those type of things, you need to have a written policy in your parent handbook outlining what are the guidelines for water activities. And then same thing with field trips. If you are taking field trips at your facility, you're going to have a specific policy outlining field trip guidelines. And we're going to talk a lot throughout this training on what those policies should include and how you want to word this right here. Most of you, your centers probably already have these policies in place, but it's probably a good idea that you do a comprehensive review to see if there are any changes that you need to make to your policies. And especially those of you that are adults that are going to be participating in summer activities and field trips, definitely want to do a comprehensive review of your policies before you start those field trips. All right. We also see in your operating policies, you must have a policy on the promotion of indoor and outdoor physical activity, all right, as outlined in the chapter on developmental activities and activity plans. Your policy must include the benefit of physical activity and outdoor play, the duration of physical activity and outdoor play, all right, the type of physical activity that the children are going to be engaged in, the setting of physical activity, so where is this going to take place, the recommended clothing and footwear that will allow children to be free and safe while participating in physical activity. This is actually really awesome right here. They added this just a few years ago. They added this to the standards. It's great because later on in today's presentation, we're going to talk about dress code on field trips for both children and adults. We've never really had anything to back us up on this. Now we do, right? And this is right here in the minimum standards, and it needs to be addressed in your policy manual. What is the appropriate clothing and footwear when children are participating in summer and field trip activities? So this is super cool. All right. How will you determine when it's the weather is extreme? So in this scenario right here for summer activities, when is it too hot to go outside? So we're going to talk about that in a later slide, but you definitely want to make sure that this is outlined in the minimum in your policies. Sorry. And then how are you going to ensure that children are getting physical activity when they can't go outside? All right. So when you're planning your summer events, okay, when you're planning your summer activities and your field trips, always plan multiple backup plans. All right. So our goal is to take children outside. Our goal is to take children on field trips. They're going to get their required physical activity, during those times. But in the event that it's too hot to go outside or it's raining, right, you have to have a plan for them to continue to get their physical activity even indoors. And this is a very commonly cited deficiency, is that when it's too hot to go outside or if it's raining, you just kind of eliminate physical activity, and that is a deficiency. All right. So I would come up with a nice portfolio of physical activities that can be done indoors that you can do at a moment's notice. Okay. I see somebody over in the comment screen that's saying that this is their first, the first one. I thought you were saying it's your first summer working summer activities and field trips. I was going to say, welcome, woo, woo, woo. So much fun, so much fun. And I see someone in my office is replying to them with how this is going to work. Basically, you're just going to participate in the webinar, and at the end of the webinar, we will give you a link to complete an assessment to receive your certificate of completion. I also added under operational policies, applying insect repellent or sunscreen. So your policy needs to be very specific. Who is going to provide sunscreen or insect repellent? If the parent provides the sunscreen, then permission is implied. If the school or the facility is providing the sunscreen, then you must get written permission from the parent. I always recommend that the parent provides insect repellent or sunscreen. We got to be very careful with skin allergies, asthma, different types of reactions that could happen. And when you're using one product, you could cause some issues right there. All right, so parent supplying these items, I always think is best right there. I do also like it when you require spray suntan lotion or sunscreen. That way you can just spray the child down. You really want to reduce the risk of your adults rubbing their bare hands all over the child. That could easily, turn into some type of false allegation, and we don't want that either, right? So I do like it when you have the spray sunscreen. That's really helpful right there. I said earlier that according to the child care minimum standards, if the parent provides sunscreen and insect repellent, then permission is implied. I would still recommend that you have a sunscreen permission form or a insect repellent permission form that is signed by the parent. Even if the parent is supplying the items, I would just make sure you've got that protection. Okay. When we talk about the admissions form, and I understand that some of this is clerical and administrative responsibilities, and some of you, might be caring and educating the children, and you're not involved in the administrative and clerical part of the business. But again, I think it's important for you to be aware of this. Something that has changed, all right? This is something that is new for us. And this is the very first summer that we've got this new rule right here, all right? Now, we've always required permission to transport. We've always required permission for field trips, all right? It's always been a requirement to have an emergency authorization form in the event of a significant event that you're able to provide emergency medical treatment for the child. And we're going to talk about that later on in the presentation. And we've always been required to have permission to participate in water activities. Here's what has changed. So I want to make sure everyone does a comprehensive review of their admission information to make sure that you have the proper permissions right here. What has changed is that your enrollment form or admission form, whatever you call it, all right, you must get written permission from the parent if you allow the child to access a swimming pool. And the parent must indicate if the child can swim competently as defined by the American Red Cross, or if the child requires a personal flotation device. If the child is unable to swim competently, or if the child is at a risk of injury or death when swimming. All right, they're going to be required a personal flotation device. So that last part right there is what is new for this summer. So make sure you go back and audit your enrollment forms. Make sure that you've got this indication from the parent. So that's going to be important for you as well. These are just some helpful tips right here that was outlined in the Child Care Minimum Standards when we talk about being able to swim competently as defined by the American Red Cross. So those of you that are taking your children swimming, And I recommend that you take this material right here and cut and paste it straight into your policy manual. All right. So when you talk about field trips and you talk about water and swimming activities, make sure that this is addressed in your policy manual, exactly what you see on the screen right here. And this is also in the minimum standards. All right. In order for a child to be able to demonstrate competency, they have to step or jump into the water that goes over the child's head. They have to be able to return to the surface and tread water for 1 minute. They have to be able to turn around in a full circle and find the exit. They have to be able to swim 25 yards to the exit. All right. Exiting from the water, if in a pool, they have to be able to exit without using a ladder. Okay, so they have to be able to hop onto the side right there. So that's what the American Red Cross defines as swimming competently. All right. And then, of course, when we talk about, the child is at risk of severe injury or death when swimming, they've got some examples right there on the screen. Usually the biggest one is that there is a special care need that could prevent the child from swimming competently and placing them at risk. If you watch my water safety video, we've got some data on there specifically about children with autism have a very high risk of drowning, because of their special care need. So these things like that you need to be aware of for sure. All right, let's kind of move over to supervision right here. So now we are talking about all of you that are participating in summer activities and field trips. And we've talked about supervision in the classroom and many other trainings. I want y'all to really focus right now. Like, I know you're sitting behind a computer screen and you're, if you're doing this live, you're probably sitting at home. Some of you might be sitting with your school family. Some of you might be watching this recorded video later on, wherever you're at. But I want you to imagine you're sitting on your playground right now, okay? So imagine that you're sitting on your playground and just imagine looking around, at your playground area. You're looking around at your playground equipment, and I just want y'all to get this image in your head, all right, of your playground. So as we go through these responsibilities that you have when supervising your child, I want you to specifically think about all of these responsibilities while you're on a playground, okay? Because when you're on the playground, supervision is very different than when you're enclosed in a classroom, okay? So obviously you have to know which children that you're responsible for. Always have a written list of the children that are present that particular day. Okay. Know how many children you're responsible for. Again, we've got a lot of attendance tracking strategies that we use to make sure that children are always accounted for, that you know exactly how many children you're responsible for at any given moment. Okay, that's going to be really critical too. If you go to my website, timthetrainer.com, and you go to documents, we have some sample attendance tracking tools to kind of help you out with that. Have information to the child's name and age. Okay, now this is really important for summer and field trip activities because most of you that are watching this video and most of you that are going to be participating in summer and field trip activities are working with school-age children. And that could be children anywhere from 5 years old to 13 years old, right? And developmentally and chronologically, mentally and emotionally, right? They're going to be all over the board. Okay, so that's a lot, for those of you working with after-school programs and in summer camps, because you've got to be very knowledgeable of what is developmentally appropriate for a very wide range of children's ages, okay? So knowing, of course, knowing the child's name is imperative. but having that information on how old they are, this is going to be very, very beneficial to your success. All right. Make sure that you're providing a level of supervision necessary to ensure each child's safety and well-being. Make sure you're paying very close attention to physical proximity. Okay, how close are you to the children? How quickly can you get to them, right? When we talk about playground supervision, there's a lot of climbing, there's a lot of running, there's a lot of jumping, right? And remember the laws of gravity. What goes up must eventually come down, right? So when you have children on that playground equipment and they're climbing up, they're eventually going to come down, right? So you always want to position yourself in a way that you are close, okay? That you can get to that child quickly right there if something were to go, wrong. Pay close attention to auditory and visual awareness. You have to be able to see and hear what's going on, all right? So, one thing I recommend all the time, if you're capable of doing this, get down on your hands and knees and crawl around your playground, okay? So that you can see that playground from the child's point of view. Look for the blind spots, all right? Where are areas of the playground where you're not going to be able to see the children? Because when you're talking about physical proximity, you want to be able to position yourself in a way that you can see and be aware of those children's presence. I want y'all to also focus right here where it says auditory awareness, okay? You have to be able to hear the children. That means you can't have anything in your ears, okay? We tend to be having a big issue right now in our industry with teachers wanting to wear earbuds, or some type of device in their ear for music or cell phone use and that type of stuff. Now remember, personal use of electronic devices, including cell phones and MP3 players, is a violation of the Child Care Minimum Standards. So you shouldn't have those type of devices to begin with. But earbuds especially is a big no-no, because you have to be able to hear and be aware of what the child is doing. You can't do that with an earbud in your ear, all right? Now, the only exception to that is if it is some type of medical necessary device like a hearing aid, right, that is assisting the person in hearing. That is something that is protected by the Americans with Disability Act, but that is a medical diagnosis, and it is a reasonable accommodation to that special need. All right? So, but again, you got to be kind of careful these days because, a lot of hearing aids can also play music, and you can talk on the phone on your hearing aid, right? So you got to be aware that, it should be used for auditory awareness and not for personal pleasure. Okay. And then I want y'all to also look at number 5 on this particular list. Intervene when necessary. You have to be able to position yourself and be in a proximate area where you're able to intervene when necessary to protect the children. Okay. So I like to include with this, you have to be mobile. All right, you have to be willing and able to move quickly to get to that child or to the children to keep them safe. But that ability to intervene is really critical. Also, when deciding how closely to supervise a child, you want to be aware once again of their chronological age, their current stage of development, their individual differences and abilities, the indoor and outdoor layout of the program, any circumstances, hazards, or risk surrounding the child. And then look at number 6, all right? And for summer camps and summer activities and field trips, I want y'all to pay attention to this, okay? The child's physical, mental, emotional, and social needs. And that is going to change the way you supervise that particular child. All right? So we've always got to be on top of that. And during summertime, and especially when it's so busy and there's a lot going on, their physical, mental, emotional, and social needs can change at a moment's notice, right? So I love that they added this to the minimum standards because I think it's so incredibly important. All right, let's talk now about training requirements. So what are some of the training requirements that are specific to summer activities and field trips right here? If you are taking children on a field trip, if you are transporting children in a bus or a van, all right, if you have children under the age of 2, all right, you must have an additional adult on that vehicle. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Just wanted to go ahead and mention that right here. Those of you that are transporting children, all right, if you are involved in transportation of children, you must have at least 2 hours of transportation safety training each year. And your 2 hours of transportation safety training is exclusive of pre-service requirements, orientation, annual training, any of that stuff. It is a completely different requirement, a completely different animal. So before you start doing your field trips this summer, you want to make sure that you're current on your transportation safety training. Okay? Also, I mentioned this earlier too, those of you that are taking children swimming, either at your facility or away from your facility, you must have water safety training. All right. And again, this is a brand new requirement. This is the very first summer in 2025 that we're going to have this water safety requirement. So again, if you're taking your children swimming, make sure that you have your water safety training as well. Once again, water safety training is exclusive of any requirement for orientation, pre-service, and annual training. So transportation safety training and water safety training do not count towards annual training requirements. They are a completely separate expectation. Let's talk about field trips. Whenever you are going on a field trip, meaning you're taking children off of your premises, these are your child staff ratios that must be followed. It is lower than normal classroom ratios. Now you'll see on the chart that's on your screen, children 0 to 23 months, you got to have a 1-on-1 ratio. 2-year-olds, 1-to-2 ratio. 3-year-olds, 1-to-6. 4-year-olds, 1-to-8. I don't know very many programs that take children, 4 and under on field trips. Sometimes I see a program taking a pre-K classroom on field trips, but nowadays it's very, very rare for a program to take children 4 and under on a field trip. But if you do, right, then here are your ratios that have to be followed. Now, if you're doing summer camp and you've got school-age children, here are the ratios for them. If it's a group of 5-year-olds, you're going to follow a 1 adult for every 10 children. If you're doing 6 and up, it goes to 12 children for each adult. And the way you're going to determine the child staff ratio is you're going to average the age of the group. Okay, so you're going to take all of the children, all right, put them in chronological order from youngest to oldest, figure out what the average age is, and that average age is the ratio that you follow. Okay, that's a lot of work and it's a lot of math. And some of you might be going, oh my gosh, we've got 95 school-age children. That's going to be hard to figure out the average age. The rule that I still follow, and this rule changed 22 years ago, but I still like to follow this rule. I like to go by youngest child in the group. Okay? You're going to be exceeding the expectations. It's going to be the safest thing to do. And then that way, you're in compliance. All right? So that's just my recommendation. Technically, it's the average age of the group, but if you want to go with the youngest child in the group and go by that ratio, that works too. All right. Again, I just think that's the easiest. I'm all about keep it easy. All right. This is where it's going to talk about transporting children under the age of 2. If you are transporting children under the age of 2, you must have an additional adult in the vehicle other than the driver. Okay. Now, children over the age of 2, the driver counts in ratio. Okay. But here it's going to tell you there must be another adult in the vehicle to assist those children and to engage, to comfort, to keep them safe when you're transporting these young children right here. Now, a best practice is to always have a second adult in the vehicle when possible. All right. If you are able to staff that transportation and that field trip so that you've got a driver and an adult passenger, that is always best case scenario. All right. The driver needs to be focused on driving safely. Okay. Their responsibility is to get the children safely to their destination. We want to avoid the driver being distracted. So if you have a second adult on that vehicle, that second adult is going to be able to supervise and engage the children, right? So that the driver can focus on the road. Okay. That is a best practice. So if your program is able to staff, 2 adults on a vehicle, that is always best. If it is children under the age of 2, then you must have that second person on there. Water activities, and again, a water activity is defined as a body of water less than 18 inches. All right, you can see what your child staff ratios are right here. So again, for your school-age children, a 5-year-old, you've got 22 children for each adult. 6 to 8-year-olds, 22 for each adult. 9-year-olds and up, 25 to 1. Again, just go by the average age of the group, or if you want to go by the youngest child in the group, that's fine too. Now, a water activity, again, is a body of water less than 18 inches. If there is no body of water, then you go by normal classroom ratio. So if you're doing sprinkler play, you have a splash pad, and there's no body of water less than 18 inches, then you go with regular classroom ratio. I do work with a lot of programs that have splash pads and sprinklers. They make the choice in their policy manual to follow water activity ratios just, because that's good practice right there. That's best practice. So if you want to exceed the expectation during those times, again, it's a brilliant idea. Strongly encourage that. When children are swimming, so again, a swimming pool is a body of water greater than 18 inches. All right. Once again, you can see the child staff ratio. Children 0 to 23 months, a 1-to-1. 2-year-olds, 2 children per adult. 3-year-olds, 6 children per adult. 4-year-olds, 8 children per adult. Again, I don't know very many programs that take children under the age of 4 swimming. If you do it, obviously you need to follow these ratios. Most of the time it's school-age children that are going to the swimming pool. In that case, the 5-year-olds, 10 children per adult. For your 6 and older, 12 children per adult. Right here, it's going to talk about the certified lifeguard. The certified lifeguard must be on duty when you are swimming in a swimming pool. So again, more than 18 inches of water, you must have that certified lifeguard on duty. The certified lifeguard is not counted in child staff ratio, child caregiver ratio. So they are in addition to. This is also something that I really want y'all to see. Okay, because this is another very common deficiency when we talk about summer activities and field trip safety. Any person that is counted in child caregiver ratio, if you're taking them to a swimming pool, that adult has to be able to swim. Okay? You have to be able to swim. You must be prepared to swim in the event of an emergency. You cannot take an adult on a field trip who doesn't know how to swim if you're going to a swimming pool, right? And we see that happen all the time, that I'll do surprise visits on programs and show up at a swimming pool just to make sure everything is safe and everything's going well. And I'll see these teachers, sitting on the side, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Are you responsible for supervising the perimeter? Or, why aren't you in the pool? Oh, I don't know how to swim. Why are you on a swimming field trip if you don't know how to swim, right? So make sure that, you're getting that covered right there. I have had many situations, y'all, where I have been on a field trip to a swimming pool or a water park, and a child was in distress, and the lifeguard was completely, oblivious to it, and I had to jump in the pool to save the child. Okay, I've had to do it many times. So you can't rely on, the lifeguard in these types of situations to keep the children safe. When I'm staffing a swimming field trip, I do always require at least one caregiver in the water with the children and at least one caregiver outside of the pool circling the perimeter. Okay? And if you have more than one, I think it's better if they're in the pool with the children, but I always want at least one adult outside of the pool circling the perimeter, supervising children with that bird's eye view, okay? And then everyone else in the pool. And usually they rotate so that they have some different responsibilities right there. But that is how I like to supervise swimming field trips, and that works out really well. And then also, you don't want a child getting out of the pool and wandering away, okay, because they will do that from time to time. That person that is outside monitoring the perimeter is going to be able to catch any child that gets out of the pool and tries to wander. Okay, almost done with standards and regulations, and then we'll move on to techniques. Taking children away from the center on a field trip. Here is what child care licensing requires when you're taking children on field trips. Now, I'm going to give you some other stuff later on, but this is what is required by child care regulations. All right? You must have signed permission slips from the parent that gives you permission to take that child on the field trip. It must also include permission to transport. All right? So make sure you're getting those permission slips signed. I've done this multiple different ways, but I like to have my field trip permission slips filled out and signed before the day of the field trip. So usually, we do something like the field trip permission slip has to be signed, at least 3 days before the field trip. That's a good practice. Or something else that I've done is I've just created permission slips for all of the field trips for the entire summer, and we put them in a notebook, and the parent signs all of them at one time, okay, for the entire summer right there. Okay, that works out really well too. What I want you to avoid is trying to get those signatures the day of the field trip. That is chaotic. You're always going to have a parent that doesn't do it, and then you're having to make the phone call and get them up there to sign it. That's just too much to deal with on the day of the field trip when you've got a lot of other stuff on your plate. So make sure you've got good processes in place that you're getting those permission slips signed prior to the day of the field trip. So that way, the day of the field trip, you can focus on, the success of that day instead of chasing papers. All right. Make sure that you have your emergency consent forms. So this is going to be that emergency document that is required in children's records, giving you permission to seek emergency medical care in the event of a significant event. And I'm going to always recommend, and especially for field trips and transportation, that your emergency consent form includes a current photograph of the child. Okay? So at the beginning of the summer, take some new pictures of the children and update that emergency consent form. If you are on a field trip or when you're transporting children and you have a significant event and the emergency personnel show up, you can't rely on the adult to be able to identify the children, because the adult may also be severely injured and may be unconscious. So having that current photograph of the child on the consent form is going to help emergency personnel identify that child. Make sure that all caregivers have a written list of all children that are on that field trip, and you need to have some type of attendance tracking process in place where you're taking roll and you're doing your name to face often. All right? My general rule that I've always had my schools follow is that if they are on a field trip and they are mixing with the public, you do a name to face every 5 minutes. Okay, and I know that's a lot, but when you're mixing with the public, you always have to make sure those children are accounted for. So I say every 5 minutes as often as possible. Okay, but you can decide within your organization what is a reasonable amount of time. My recommendation is every 5 minutes when you're mixing with the public. If you're not mixing with the public, so you rented out the roller skating rink and you're the only program in that roller skating rink, then doing roll call every 15 or 20 minutes, I think that is appropriate right there. All right, but it's when you're mixing with the public, you need to be more on top of this. Make sure you always have a current and stocked first aid kit anytime you're transporting children and when you're on a field trip. So we like to use the fanny packs. Those work out really well. I've also used backpacks in the past where we have the first aid supplies that just go on the field trip or they go on transportation, whatever works best for you and your program. I've done both, fanny packs, backpacks, bags, all of that stuff. And make sure you've got a good process in place that those first aid kits are checked weekly to make sure that they are fully stocked and everything is in there that's supposed to be in there. All right. This is another very common cited item, is that first aid kits are not completed. All right. If you have a child with a food allergy emergency plan, then that must also be taken on the field trip with you. If you are serving a lunch or a snack while you're on that field trip, you need to be aware of any food allergies. Now, obviously, if you have a child that does not have any food allergies, then this form is not required. So it's only an if applicable right here. Make sure the child wears some type of indicator that they belong to your program, such as a t-shirt, a name tag, whatever it is that you choose right there, that has the Child Care Center's name and telephone number. And y'all, that should be the only thing that's on that t-shirt or wristband or name badge, is the Child Care Center's name or the after-school program's name and telephone number. You never want to expose a child's name to the public. Okay, that's a big risk right there. All right, so that is something that is to be kept private and confidential and used for internal purposes. But just put your center's name and phone number. All right. Each caregiver that is on the field trip must also be easily identifiable, either by a t-shirt or a hat or, bright colored clothing, something like that. The way I've done it forever and ever is, the teachers that are on the field trip wear the same style t-shirt that the children are wearing, so everybody matches. And then we'll usually put, teacher or role model or whatever your job title is on the back of that t-shirt, indicating that, they are the adult that's responsible for those children. If you allow parent volunteers to participate in summer activities and field trips, I like to have a completely separate t-shirt that says like parent volunteer on the back of it. I like it when you're able to distinguish the difference between the employee that is responsible for the group of the children versus the volunteer that basically is just there to be present. All right. I have found in many situations that works really well to distinguish the difference between those adults. All right. Make sure that you have transportation available, and that while you are transporting children and you are on a field trip, you have some type of communication device so that you can communicate with the center. So this could be a cell phone, it could be a two-way radio, or have some type of alternate plan for transporting the children in the event of an emergency. Now, if you are taking cell phones on field trips to meet this requirement, okay, they are only to be used in the event of an emergency. Remember, once again, personal use of electronic devices are prohibited when you're responsible for a group of children and counted in child staff ratio. My recommendation on number 8, and I'm going to recommend this all day long, every day, that if you're doing field trips and if you're transporting children, you have a business-owned telephone that is taken while transporting children and when on field trips. It is a cell phone that is owned by the school, and that is the phone that is used in the event of an emergency. That way, you're not relying on the employees to use their personal devices to meet this criteria. Okay? We want to avoid that right there. And then, of course, make sure that your people are trained and current on CPR certification and first aid training. Last thing we have on standards and regulations right here, must you notify parents when you take children on field trips? We kind of went over that field trip permission slip right there. But what must be included on this field trip permission form? You must notify parents of each child who is on that field trip, indicating when and where the child is going and when the child is expected to return to the center. This does need to be posted at least 48 hours in advance of the field trip. All right? Has to be posted in a prominent place where parents can view it. All right? Now, we usually hand out a summer calendar that's got all of the field trips, planned out in advance. We usually post our summer calendar in a prominent area. But I would still, even if you're using a calendar, I would still have an individualized notice that is posted, at least 48 hours in advance of each individual field trips. Where are they going? What time are they leaving? What time are they coming back? All right. If you're using some type of communication platform, like a lot of you use ProCare Connect or you use Brightwheels, there's so many different communication platforms now with parents, and you're using that to notify them of a field trip. That is acceptable. However, you need to clearly outline in your policy how you're going to post and communicate this information with parents who may not have a smartphone or may not have data accessible to them. Just because you have these communication platforms, you can't make the assumption that every parent has a smartphone and every parent has data to receive these notices. Okay? So you still need to have that backup plan on that one right there. When you're indicating what time you're leaving and what time you're coming back, always give yourself a grace period. All right? I like at least a 30-minute grace period on when you're leaving. Okay, so if you're planning to leave for your field trip at 10 o'clock in the morning, I would tell the parents we're leaving at 9:30. All right? If you're planning on coming back at 3 o'clock, I would tell the parent that you're coming back at 3:30. All right? Always give yourself that little grace period for delays. All right? Those type of things. If a parent is late to drop off their child for a field trip, then our policy is very clear. The child doesn't go on the field trip. All right? Now, something else that I'm going to recommend right here, and this is something that you're going to need to discuss with your leadership team or amongst your leadership team. The way I've always done this is that if a parent does not want their child to participate in a field trip, then the child is not allowed to be in attendance that day. All right? We have that in our parent handbook, that if a child is unable to participate in a field trip, they don't attend the program that day. Okay? If you have a parent that says, I don't want my child going on this field trip, well, what are you going to do with them? Okay? I don't have a teacher to leave behind to supervise one child. It's not developmentally appropriate to put them in another classroom. Putting them in another classroom is going to mess up that classroom's ratio and group size. It could also be belittling or shaming that child to have them in a younger classroom. You can't keep them in the office because then whoever's working in the office cannot perform administrative or clerical duties while supervising a child. There's just, too much of that, okay? So I have found it best to just put it on our policy manual. If a child is unable to go on a field trip, they just simply don't attend that day, okay? Someone is asking about water play at the center. I would follow the same rule. Now remember, I'm going to refer you to health practices in the Child Care Minimum Standards. You know what? I should have included this in today's presentation. Oops, I made a mistake, but I'm going to verbally tell you this. All right, but I should have included this. Under health practices, under illness exclusion in the Child Care Minimum Standards, it very specifically says in black and white, okay, you must not admit a child in care, all right, if the child is unable to participate comfortably in the program's activities, including outdoor play. And that is in the minimum standards. So if you ever have a parent that says, I don't want my child to go outside today, if they're unable to go outside, if they're too sick to go outside, they're too sick to be in care. Right? And y'all, that's what you need to stick to. Otherwise, you run into all of these other supervision and placement obstacles that I just mentioned earlier. Okay? So kind of keep that in mind right there. All right? Let's kind of move on. So that completes our overview of minimum standards for summer safety and field trip guidelines. So now we're going to actually move into summer and field trip safety. You are required to determine when is it safe to take children outside and when there is extreme weather that prevents children from going outside. Now remember, in the Child Care Minimum Standards, you are required to provide children with outdoor play when weather permits, all right? It is up to you, the program, to determine when weather permits. This is not something that's outlined in the minimum standards. There are many, many factors that have to be taken into consideration when determining when it is permitting to take children outside. You could have shade on your playground. You could have shade structures. You could have a lot of trees. That's going to change weather permitting. The climate that you're in. right? Those of you that are in like Amarillo, your weather permitting is going to look very different than people that are in Lubbock or people that are in Laredo, right? So what climate is the children used to? That's going to, change weather permitting as well. What I have on the screen right here is a sample. Sample. Do y'all need to look up the word sample in the dictionary? Okay, now this is just a sample weather permitting chart. This is what I've used in my schools right here. You're more than welcome to use what I'm sharing. If you want to adapt this based on your individual program, go for it. But this is what I like to do. I like to focus on heat index and wind chill rather than temperature. All right. So we go by heat index during the summer. So if the heat index is less than 90, then they get their typical 30 minutes of outside time 2 times a day. If the heat index is 90 to 95, then we're going to do 15 minutes in the sun, 15 minutes in the shade, right? If it's 95 to 100, still going to try to do 5 minutes, outdoor, and then up to 25 minutes in the shade if you have shade available. All of my schools had big shade structures, so we were very blessed. If the heat index is over 100, then they're only going to do shade play, limited to 10 minutes, and then we take them back inside, and we provide adequate physical activity indoors. Okay. During the winter months, we go by wind chill, and you can kind of see right here, we stagger it based on the wind chill. We still want the children to go outside to get the vitamins from the sun, to get the fresh air. We want to get them out of the bubble. It is a requirement by child care regulations that we provide outdoor time when weather permits. All right. So I like the staggering method as long as you can do it in a safe manner for your particular program. Okay. You also need to indicate in your policy manual the source that you're getting your weather permitting from. So if you're using an app like WeatherBug or one of your local news stations weather app, to get the temperature or the heat index or the wind chill, then you want to indicate that in your policy manual. So how are you determining these factors? And that needs to be listed right there. Okay. And I recommend for those of you that are administrators and directors that are participating in this training, I recommend that you have one designated individual that determines weather permitting each day. So whether it's the director or the assistant director or the after-school program leader, whoever it may be, but one person that is responsible for indicating, are the children going outside today or are they not going outside today? You don't want this to be wide open and each individual teacher makes that determination, because that's going to create licensing confusion, all kinds of stuff. Why did this classroom go out but this one didn't, right? So kind of keep that in mind. I have seen in some situations where this sample weather permitting guideline has been broken down into like an infant toddler weather permitting chart and in a preschool pre-K after school weather permitting chart. I have seen it done differently for infants and toddlers versus some of the older children. It's actually a pretty good idea. All right. I like that one too. When you are going outside, someone is asking me a question. What do you suggest for shade structures? You have heard that the sail types covers have had issues with snapping in the high winds, and then also worry about the poles becoming a hazard if they run into them. Yes and yes, all right? Like I said, I've had shade structures at all of my programs. Anytime I acquire a new school, I always budget to put in shade structures if they don't already have them. The sails that you're referring to, they're really cool looking. But yes, I have seen a lot of damage, especially if you are in a windy part of the state. You might really want to take that into consideration. If you are in an area of the state where you do have a lot of significant weather, you want to take that into consideration as well. Your typical standard shade structure that is one piece of fabric or mesh that covers the shaded area, I have found those to be the best, right there. And they've really, over the last 20 years, the quality of these shade structures have really, really been enhanced. So they're pretty good. When you talk about the poles being a hazard, we usually paint them like a bright yellow or something where they're easily noticed. And a lot of times they will come in those bright colors right there. I have seen programs that have wrapped them with like a padding, especially in some of the younger classrooms, they have padding around them. But honestly, the poles of the shade structure are really no different than playground equipment or other, pieces of equipment that are staggered around your playground. Just have adequate supervision and engagement. And of course, if children are running, in that area, you want to limit that. Okay, that's a good question, though. I like that question. Let's talk about what to take outside whenever you are going outside during the summertime and on field trips, right? Obviously, your fanny pack or your backpack or your bag with your first aid supplies, including but not limited to your Band-Aids, your gloves, your tissues, your plastic bags, hand sanitizer that can be used when soap and water is not available. And I always like to include your accident reports and a pen, right? We have more accidents on the playground than any other part of our program. So having those incident reports accessible allows the caregiver to go ahead and fill out that accident report, right after you administer first aid and comforting the child. And then, they're not going to get inside and forget about it and forget to do it. All right. I like to take an emergency notebook. We like to create an emergency notebook, not just for transporting children and for field trips, but we have an emergency notebook in every classroom. That includes your emergency release form, contact information for parent and guardians, that current photograph of the child that I mentioned. And even when we go outside on the playground, the emergency notebook goes outside with the class. Okay, so that way, in the event of a significant event, and the fire alarm goes off, or you have to activate your crisis plan, when you've got a group of children outside, you don't have to rely on someone running inside and getting this information and running back out. Okay, you've got all of the necessary information needed right outside with you that you can keep the children and the adults safe. All right. On the shade structures, the poles are mounted into the ground. They're concreted into the ground. And so whenever you get your shade structures, they are going to need to meet the playground equipment safety guidelines that are out there. And so, those being properly mounted into the ground is a requirement. All right. So, yeah. Great. And then during these summer months, we always like to take water outside for the children, cups, make sure that you have a trash can with a lid that is taken outside. Some of you have water fountains on your playground. That's really nice to have. Just be careful because sometimes the water that comes out of the water fountain is hot, and we want it to be refreshing, okay? I always like to have a trash can that is mounted or secure that is out on the playground so that all of your trash goes in the trash can and not all over your yard. That's a big trigger for me right there. Another big trigger for me is plastic bags that are tied to the fence. Okay. Not only does that look really bad on your playground, it is a safety risk. Okay, because if you have a trash bag or a plastic bag tied to your fence for children to put their trash in, a child could get into that and it could be a suffocation issue. All right, so have a proper trash can with a lid that you can put on your playground in those situations. Supervising and zoning the playground. All right, we talked about this a little bit when we were going through the minimum standards, but I got a little bit more information right here to share with you. If there are multiple adults on the playground, always make sure that you're spreading out so that you're covering all areas of the playground and all areas of the playground are properly monitored. Be aware of your blind spots. Make sure that your blind spots are accounted for. I recommended earlier getting down on your hands and knees if needed to discover where those blind spots are. Y'all, I've gone as far as, there was obviously an issue in this situation, but where I have taken and I've made a diagram of the playground, right? And I've had to put processes in place. If there's one teacher on the playground, you need to be in this general area. If there's two teachers on the playground, one person is in this general area, person number two is in this general area. If there's three, and I've had to kind of indicate the zones that each person is responsible for on the playground, So if that's something you might want to consider, we have found that to be pretty helpful. I got a question over here. What if parents are providing water bottles or water cups? Should they go home to wash every day, or is that the center's responsibility? That's going to be up to you on how you write that policy and how you practice that process. Whether you want to keep the water bottles and cups at the program and you wash them, or if you want to send them home every day to be washed, totally up to you. All right. I have found it easier to keep them at the facility. All right. And then we just have, part of our closing duties that those water bottles and water cups are washed and sanitized appropriately each day, because I just can't rely on the parent or guardian to appropriately wash and sanitize those water bottles and cups. Not to mention sending it home and getting it back the next day, right? So I have just found it much easier for them to bring in a water bottle that stays at the facility during the summer time, okay? That's what I have found to be easiest. I have done this too, where when we're building our summer programs, we always have some type of summer registration fee. And that pays for their t-shirt, pays for some of the other stuff. But I have included a water bottle that is branded, right? That we can put the child's name on, and that's part of their summer registration packet. And so we provide the water bottle, and then we keep them at the facility. And at the end of the summer, we send it all home. I've done that many, many times as well, okay? If you are in a situation where there's only one adult supervising that playground, you may want to limit a portion of the playground to be open and a portion of the playground to be closed, just depending on the size of your playground and what the supervision needs are. All right, so y'all can kind of decide that based on your physical building premises and decide if you need to limit the amount of space that's open or not. Always make sure you're monitoring who's coming in on and off of the playground. Okay, you always need to be aware of who's coming and going. With our school-age children, this is very common that, parents stick their head out the playground door and the kid goes running in and the teacher never sees it, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, where's Johnny? Okay, and you're looking all over the place for Johnny and he left 10 minutes ago, right? And parents and guardians can sometimes be really bad at checking in with the adult that's responsible for the group of children. and say, I'm taking him, right? You should have your sign in and out sheets, but a lot of you are doing sign in and out with digital platforms. I'm not a big fan of that for this particular reason, especially that you're missing the adult to adult interaction, which I think is really critical, right? So having someone that monitors who's coming on and off of the playground is going to help you in those scenarios. Make sure you're acknowledging anyone that walks on and off of your playground. Again, people have to know that they're there. We want to avoid propping doors open for multiple different reasons. It's a safety hazard. It could damage the building and equipment, but it's also providing the opportunity for a child to just run into that building unsupervised. All right. And especially with your older children, we see this all the time. And of course, make sure that your ratios are maintained at all time. It is everybody's responsibility to ensure that ratios are maintained at all times. It's not just the director, it's everybody. I just want to include this right here. Outside time is not a break time for adults, all right? Oh, I got to take these kids outside. I need a break from them. No, when you are outside, you should be just as engaged or more engaged with the children during this critical time right here. All right? Your engagement, your interaction, your participation is going to set up success. It also keeps the children safe. Your attention should be 100% focused on what's happening on that playground. It is not social time for the adults. Time for you to catch up on the latest gossip and who's dating who and what's going on with this parent and that parent, right? When's that teacher going to get fired? We can't stand her. Remember, every conversation that adults have, there is a child listening, okay? But again, your focus should be on the children and their health and safety, not on social time for adults. According to the Child Care Minimum Standards, outside time should never be used as a form of punishment or discipline. You can never limit children's physical activity as a form of discipline or punishment. All right? Same thing with reward. If you're good today, we'll take you outside. Okay, that's also something that is a deficiency. Outside is a critical time in the child's development. Signs of heat exhaustion. And I really want to point out, when we talk about signs of heat exhaustion, we are responsible for not only protecting the health and safety of the children, but you want to protect the health and safety of the adults too. So yourself, the other teachers that are out on the playground, parents and guardians who are coming to pick up and drop off their children, right? We got to be looking at everybody to make sure that they're in a healthy condition to properly care for the children. I have seen more significant events involving adults suffering from heat exhaustion than I have children suffering from heat exhaustion, okay? I could tell you a story about a 2-year-old teacher that was outside on the playground by herself with a group of children, and the teacher passed out, while on the playground, and these kids were completely unsupervised, right? So kind of keep this in mind right here. The pale and clammy hands, heavy sweating, fatigue, weakness, dizziness, headache, being nauseous, muscle cramps, vomiting, fainting, all of these are possible signs of heat exhaustion that you need to be aware of, okay? I would recommend posting this, somewhere where it's visible. Maybe if you are taking that notebook or that clipboard outside, contact papering this to the back of the clipboard or on the bottom of the clipboard so that you can have that constant reminder of signs of heat exhaustion. Okay, so I think that's pretty important right there. Some ways to prevent heat exhaustion. Encourage adults and children to drink an adequate amount of water. This is the best way to prevent heat exhaustion, is to be properly hydrated. All right, properly hydrated. We're really, really good at making sure the children drink their water. We're not good at making sure that the adults have plenty of water. Okay, so don't forget about you and your co-workers right there. Fresh fruit will also help prevent heat exhaustion. Water hats are very popular right now. You know, the cooling hats that you can get at pretty much every department store, or towels that you can put around your neck. Playing in the shade so that you're not in that direct sun will help prevent heat exhaustion. Avoid the hottest parts of the day. Plan accordingly. You know, our typical playground schedule, you know, we start taking children outside around 9 a.m., right, on a typical day. When we start getting to June and July and August, we change our outdoor schedule. And I have classrooms that are starting to go outside as early as 7 a.m. for those of you that are open full-time hours, okay? So the early parts of the day is a great time to get that outdoor time without it being too hot. Usually by July, here in North Texas, our afternoon outdoor play, we are exceeding the heat index outlined in our policy, and there's no outdoor time in the afternoon. And that usually happens by July-ish, depending on the season. So feel free to adapt that outdoor schedule as needed so that you can get the children outside and avoid the hottest parts of the day. Making sure that everyone is cooling off frequently. Use sunscreen as directed, okay? Now I want y'all to examine the sunscreen directions, all right? So the sunscreen that the parents are sending in, or if you're purchasing the sunscreen, most of the time it will say that the sunscreen must be applied at least 30 minutes before going outside, okay? So you want to make sure that you're applying that sunscreen as directed. So many times I go to a program and the kids are like actually on the playground and the teacher is lathering the kid up. That's not going to do any good, all right? If it says it needs to be applied 30 minutes before going outside, you want to make sure that you're following those directions. If you do have an individual that starts showing signs of heat exhaustion, we want to have them drink water. If possible, sports drinks such as Gatorade will be helpful to get that person hydrated. Now, you definitely want to be aware of food allergies in that situation. There may be some children, some adults that can't have some of these sport drinks or hydrating drinks. So these are conversations you want to have in advance on whether this is something that can be given or not. Water and fruit juice, 100% fruit juice will be helpful right there. Obviously, put the person in a shaded area. And if the symptoms persist, then you want to get medical help as soon as possible. All right. Also being aware of any of the child's special care needs. All right. Any other type of indicators that that child needs medical attention as soon as possible. Okay, let's go back into field trips now and kind of talk about field trip safety. Loading and unloading the vehicle. Never allow a child to enter or exit a vehicle alone. All right, we always want to have adequate adult supervision so that the adult is fully aware of who is entering and who is exiting that vehicle. If you allow children to enter and exit a vehicle by themselves, you got a safety issue because they could easily fall out of that vehicle and get hurt. But, you may lose that accountability of who's getting on, who's getting off. Okay? And y'all, we have this rule and we're very strict about this one. Okay? There is always an adult to assist children on and off of the buses. I don't care how old they are. You got a 12-year-old in your group, we're going to help you on and off of that bus because we want the visual awareness so that we can keep them accounted for. Child care licensing is going to require you to load and unload at a curb site. You want to avoid walking children across a parking lot. Never leave children unattended. So visually, auditory, awareness, you need to know who's on that bus and what's going on. Make sure you're maintaining your ratios at all time. And y'all, this is another big one. And trust me, I know it's hot outside. You want to get that air conditioning running. You want to cool off that vehicle. I get it. I understand it. But never allow a vehicle to be running unless there is a driver in the seat. Okay? I can tell you lots and lots of stories where a child was getting on a bus and they hit the put it in gear and the bus went driving across the parking lot by itself. All right, they hit the gear shift and put it in reverse, put it in drive. We don't want that to happen right there. I know of a school that a bus actually went into the pre-K classroom because a child knocked it in gear and the bus went forward and hit the building. All right. Make sure that you're assisting the children on and off of the bus. Identify them by name. We want that sight and sound so that we're aware of who's getting on and off. Always make sure that you're checking their seatbelts. Don't take their word for it. This is another one. If you take anything away from this training today, please take this away. Never allow children to sleep on a bus. Okay? When you're transporting children, either before or after school, or when you're transporting to and from a field trip, keep them awake. All right? Sing to them, ask them open-ended questions, have that engagement, but you want to keep them awake. The number one reason why children get left on vehicles is because they fall asleep. And when you're getting all of the children off of the vehicle, you leave that sleeping child. And that's when they get left on a vehicle. And every single summer, we hear these news stories where a child was left on a vehicle and they pass away, or, hopefully they survive. But we want to prevent that from happening. Keeping them awake will help you ensure that they're always accounted for. All right? I also have a very strict rule that whether it's transporting children to and from school or transporting children to and from a field trip, that we always have at least 2 adults walk that vehicle after it's unloaded to ensure that all of the children are off the vehicle safely. What I have done in my programs, my policy has always been that the center director or the assistant director walks every single bus after the children are unloaded. I always want to make sure that that bus is empty before we park it. All right? So we've done 2 adults, one of them being a member of management. When you are interacting with children on a field trip, again, the driver is not to use their cell phone when operating the vehicle. This includes wireless and hand-free devices, all right? If you need to make an emergency phone call, you want to pull that vehicle over into a safe parking lot, put the vehicle in park to make that emergency phone call. All right. Definitely personal use of electronic devices is prohibited in these situations. So, the driver can't call the boyfriend and see what's going on tonight, or, whatever it may be while driving that vehicle, even if they're using hands-free or wireless devices. Your focus should always be on keeping the children safe. Have those positive interactions while you're on the vehicle. Remember, your state dictates the children's state. If you stay calm, if you stay cheerful, all right, if you're excited about the field trip, you're going to download that state to the children. But if you're sitting there yelling and screaming and demanding, guess what? That's what you're downloading to the children. They're going to come back with chaotic behavior. They're going to come back with demanding behavior because they picked it up from you. All right? So always remember, your state dictates the state of the child. Ask questions about the field trip. What are you excited about? What did you learn? Reflect on the day. Have those open-ended conversations. My favorite memories of doing field trips is singing. We used to have all these crazy songs that we would sing on every single field trip that we went on. Lots and lots of fun right there. Again, if you're able to have that second adult on the vehicle, that's going to free up the driver so that the driver can focus on safe driving, and then that second adult can lead the conversations and lead the engagement. That is a best case scenario right there. In the event that you have a breakdown, the safety of the children is always the first priority. If there are injuries, call 911 immediately. Always make sure that you contact your center director, contact your school immediately if you have an emergency or a breakdown. Remember, once again, your state dictates the state of the child. Remain calm at all times. Reassure the children. We don't want them to get scared and anxious. All right? If you have a complete stranger that comes up to you and they want to assist you with vehicle maintenance, you tell them, thank you very much, we got it. All right? But never allow a stranger to perform maintenance to your vehicle. Lots of different risk and liabilities right there. All right? If maintenance does need to be performed on that vehicle, the children should not be on board while maintenance is being made. All right? So usually if we have a bus that breaks down, we're going to send another bus to pick up those children, get them back to the center safely, and then we'll go perform whatever maintenance is needed on that particular vehicle. Another really big policy that I recommend that you put in place for safety reasons is that children are never on board the bus when you're fueling it up with gas. All right? Multiple different reasons for that one right there too. So this should all be done before you're leaving on that field trip. I have my little pre-field trip checklist, things that we need to do to ensure a safe and successful field trip for the children and the adults. Always have those open-ended conversations about the trip or the activity ahead of time. We usually do it a couple of days in advance, and we do it every day leading up to the field trip. Set those boundaries, make those commitments, all right? Let the children know what the expectations are. Even with your older children, if you're transporting 8, 10, 12-year-old children, you're taking them on field trips, visuals always help explain the expectations. Visuals never get tired of telling us what the expectation is. Lots of visuals of the boundaries, lots of visuals of the commitments, lots of visuals of the expectations. Now, this might mean that you got to prepare for this. And if you're going on a field trip, before you go on the field trip, you have an adult go to that destination and take some pictures, right? So that you can create adequate visuals of what you're expecting from the children whenever you get there, all right? And if you're doing the same field trips year after year, then it's great. You can create your portfolio. You've got these visuals to use year after year. If you are in a situation like you're going to an amusement park and you're separating the children up into groups, sometimes we do that where the children are in primary care groups and you've got a couple of adults that are responsible for each group. We like to separate our groups in advance, all right? Instead of waiting until you get to the destination to do this, do it in advance. And what I have found to be helpful, and I used to operate very, very large after-school programs. We averaged anywhere from, 150 to 200 children in our after-school programs. We always created our groups for the entire summer. Okay, so the children were in the same groups with the same adults on every field trip. We would make adjustments here and there as needed, but for the most part, they had their primary grouping that they stayed in all summer. I have just found that works best. So that way the adult is not going, now who did I have last week? Who do I have this week? You've got the same consistent group. It just also helps with the expectations right there. Other things to do before the field trip. Know the details of the field trip ahead of time. So again, you want to have these open-ended conversations. I always like to plan like a 15 or 20-minute planning meeting with the leadership team and the adults that are going to be going on that field trip to lay out the expectations and the plan in advance. Whether we do this once a month throughout the summer, or sometimes I've done it where, we've planned out the entire summer, all at once. And then we have like a 3-hour meeting and we discuss each individual field trip, during that in-service time, whatever works best for you. But we don't want to be blindsided. We don't want to be surprised by, the layout of the field trip or the expectations of the field trip once you get there. Always know what route you're going to take to get from your center to the field trip. So we got Google Maps, we got Apple Maps, you got all of these different platforms now to route out your destination. Print that off, ahead of time, and then stick to the route. In the event that your vehicle breaks down, or in the event that there is a significant accident and your bus doesn't return to the center, all right, they're going to need to come looking for you. And knowing what route you're on is going to be imperative for, being found, all right? If you have distinguished your route that you're going to be taking and you start off on your field trip and there's road construction or there's a wreck, and you have to be routed differently, all right? I would pull off onto the side of the road in a parking lot in a safe area, contact the center and say, hey, we're changing our route, okay? But that communication is going to be really important right there. Make sure all of your forms are collected in advance, so your permission slips, your emergency consent slips, your food allergy emergency plans if applicable, okay, the current photograph of the children. Make sure you've got all of this organized and it's ready in advance. If you need lunches and snacks for that particular field trip, have a designated individual that is their job, is to collect lunch and snacks and get them properly boarded on the bus, okay? Always make sure you call and confirm your reservation, okay? We usually do it 3 days in advance. And then we'll do it again the morning of the field trip. Call and confirm your reservation. Again, I can't tell you how many times we've had a reservation. We show up at a destination and they overbooked or they lost the reservation or whatever might have happened, and then we have disappointed children. All right. Again, make sure you're posting that field trip in advance in a prominent area. I recommend 3 days in advance. Licensing tells you at least 48 hours in advance. We usually notify them for the entire summer. Last thing I'm going to talk about here in this particular presentation is we're going to talk about field trip and transportation supervision. Okay, always make sure you're making appropriate eye contact with the children. They need to know that you know that they're there. Okay, like I said earlier, take roll every 5 minutes when you're mixed with the public. If you are sending children into a public restroom, always make sure that an adult goes into the restroom first to make sure that that restroom is safe and sanitary. All right? You never want to send a child into a public restroom that you haven't checked out first. We don't want a strange person in that restroom. We don't want to send a child into the restroom that is unsanitary. Okay? So you want to do that. If you are in a situation where all of your adults are female and you don't have a male teacher going on that field trip, then the female needs to go to the men's restroom door, crack the door open, and, female entering. Is anyone in here? Female entering. And then you go in and check out that restroom and make sure that it's safe and sanitary before you send those children in. All right? Talk to the children about supervision. Create that felt sense of safety. If y'all want to go back and watch my video on safety and supervision techniques, I think that would be a good idea to enhance this training right here. But, supervision is not just about seeing and hearing and being aware of the children. It's about creating that energy, creating that felt sense of safety, all right, so that the children are comfortable, all right? There's not a perceived threat of danger. So lots of conversation about that. Avoid any distractions and stay attentive to the children. Sometimes I have to say this, and this is not a real popular thing to hear. Sometimes it needs to be said. Going on a field trip is not for the adult's pleasure. It's for the children's pleasure. All right? I know that we want to have fun. I know that the adults are excited about the field trip sometimes, and we want you to have fun. We want you to create those memories. But at the end of the day, it's all about the kids. All right? So kind of keep that in mind. When you're interacting and engaging with the children on field trips and outdoors, have those quality, meaningful conversations, all right, with the children. Remember, you're on display. You got a lot of people watching you. You got a lot of people that are potentially judging you, right? So those meaningful, positive interactions are going to set other people's mind at ease. Be conscious of your tone of voice, especially when you're out in the public. Your perception of getting the children's attention can be very different than other people's perception that you're yelling at them. All right? So we need to be aware of that. Make sure that those conversations are ongoing, they're productive, they're educational. Talk about those key experiences right there. Keep the children engaged. The more they're engaged, okay, the less likely you are to have a significant incident. We always have to talk about professionalism when it comes to outdoor play and field trips. Once again, you're being watched by a lot of people. Your center's integrity is on the line right here. You're a moving billboard, okay? So, having that proper summer dress code that is properly outlined in both your parent and employee handbook is important, all right? And I know it kind of sounds silly that we need to have a dress code for the children, but we do. Now, first off, remember when we talked about the minimum standard requirements for physical activity and outdoor time, your policy must include the comfortable clothing and footwear that the children must wear to participate comfortably and safely in physical activity. All right? So this also needs to be addressed here. When you're going on a field trip, especially if you're doing a lot of walking, probably want to avoid sandals and flip-flops and those type of things. They need appropriate footwear. But you also don't want your 8-year-old children dressing like they're a 21-year-old going out to the club. Okay? And sometimes we've seen that too. So have that dress code right there. Make sure that the children's behavior matches the values of your program. This is going to come from your role modeling. All right? Your engagement, your interaction with them. Be proud of your group. All right? It's amazing the quality of the field trip when you are just proud of the children and the group that you have there. You know, pride goes a long way. It really does. Practice courtesy at all times, okay, with anyone you interact with anyone that you come within 10 feet of. You know, you always want to greet, you want to smile, okay? Be that role model for the children. And always avoid confrontations. If a confrontation comes up, okay, especially if it's with a stranger, then you politely and professionally hand them a business card. You know, please contact my center director to discuss your concerns, and walk away. All right? You never want to have a confrontation in front of the children. You never want to engage in a confrontation. Hand them the director's business card, politely and professionally refer them to your center director with their questions or concerns, and then remove yourself and the children from the situation. All right? Y'all, right now in the day of social media, you know, everyone wants to be a hero. Everyone wants to be a savior. And they're just out there looking for opportunities to have a confrontation that can be recorded. All right? Y'all, that's the last thing we want on a field trip. So we want to avoid those situations. If you're allowing parent volunteers to assist, we like parent volunteers. We want to encourage parent volunteers. There's a lot of benefit to having parent volunteers. But this needs to be very carefully done. Sometimes we get into situations where, you know, you start asking yourself, is the teacher supervising the children, or are the teachers supervising the volunteers? Right? And if you're having to supervise the adult volunteers, then they shouldn't be there. All right? Always make sure you have a volunteer orientation, that you go over certain information with them before you allow them to volunteer. And if y'all want to shoot me an email, or send me a message off of our website, I'll be more than happy to share, the latest parent orientation, volunteer orientation that I have. But I think it's important for you to do. Make sure that you've got policies on place with parent volunteers. Make sure you're aware of what that looks like. Criminal background checks are required on anyone that's going to have direct access to children on a regular or frequent basis. That is defined as more than 2 times in a 30-day period. So technically, if that parent is only volunteering 1 time, okay, they're not going to be counted in child staff ratio. They're not going to be left alone with a group of children. Technically, you're not required to have a criminal background check on them. If they are going to be volunteering more than 2 times in a 30-day period, at that point, the background check would be required. My recommendation would be to exceed this standard, and I do criminal background checks on every volunteer. All right? I just think that's best practice right there. The volunteer needs to understand, they cannot discipline children. That is up to you, the person that's responsible for the group of children. They have to be free from other distractions, such as cell phones, business related stuff, work related stuff. They need to be easily identifiable. So again, that's where I like to have the t-shirt that says parent volunteer on the back. All right, make it very obvious. Volunteers are never left alone with the children. All right, because that's going to change the minimum standard expectations right there. Let me go back to volunteers cannot discipline children. That includes their own child. Okay? Remember, even while they're on your premises, parents and guardians must follow your discipline and guidance policy while they're on your premises. That includes on a field trip. Okay? Even with their own child, they have to follow your discipline and guidance policy. You're going to make sure that you go over this with them, okay, before the field trip. In the event that you have a third-party individual, let's kind of talk about third-party individuals for a second. This would be an adult, such as a tour guide, a field trip attendant, a lifeguard, someone that is not employed by your facility, but they're not a volunteer, that actually work for, the field trip destination. We see these quite often. You take the children to the ballpark and there's a tour guide, that gives them the tour of the ballpark. Or the Dallas Firefighter Museum, they have a tour guide. You take them to the bowling alley, and the bowling alley has bowling alley attendants that will help the children, down in the pit. These type of individuals. It is not the responsibility of that host to manage your field trip. You are still responsible for managing that field trip. You are still responsible for adequately supervising that group of children. Okay? Adequate supervision, adequate attendance tracking, that's all your responsibility right there. Okay? It's not the responsibility of the tour guide, the field trip attendant, the lifeguard, these type of people. When I was a district manager, I actually terminated an entire group of teachers from multiple schools at one time. I had done a drop-in visit to a bowling alley where I had 3 or 4 schools that were doing a field trip to the bowling alley at the same time. We always kind of did things in numbers right there. I show up at the bowling alley to do a surprise visit, and all of the kids are down in the lanes, and the field trip attendants, the bowling alley employees, are, assisting the children with their balls and, all of that stuff, their shoes. And all of these teachers were sitting up in the little restaurant area having themselves a little party. Okay? And they were nowhere near the group of children. They weren't paying attention to the group of children. They just left it to the field trip attendants to do it. And we ended that field trip, got everyone back to their facility, and I terminated every single one of them. Okay? So that was a bad situation right there. Okay? But, they were severely violating policies and procedures and minimum standards, and they placed all of those children at risk. All right? Be careful with, tour guides and field trip attendants. Again, we don't want to ever expose a child's full name to the public. Now, again, I use the bowling alley as an example. You're putting in the children's name and the little screen so they know when it's their turn to bowl. Just use their first name or just do their initials. But again, we want to avoid using that full name. Once again, we want to avoid confrontations. If you get into a confrontation with a tour guide or a field trip attendant, you kind of handle this the same way. Hand them a business card. Hey, I need you to contact my center director with your questions and concerns. We are not going to engage in this conversation in front of the children, and you need to remove yourself. I have had multiple situations where We have ended a field trip early because the tour guide was confrontational and we did not feel safe with their behavior. And we felt it was best to go ahead and end the field trip and leave. We've done that many times. So just avoid that. And last thing right here, when you're going on a field trip, always make sure that if you get to that destination and you don't feel like it's safe or sanitary for that child, pick up the phone, call your center director, whatever it might be. And it might be that you load the children back up and you come back to the program. The way I do it is I've always required a member of the leadership team to attend every field trip. So I always have a director or assistant director on every field trip so that someone's got that authority to make that call to end a field trip whenever needed. For example, just last summer, we had a situation where they showed up at the roller skating rink, and when they walked in, they were informed that there was no air conditioning. And they had all the doors open and they had fans on, but it was hot in there. It was like an oven in that skating rink. And, my manager on duty made the call, we're not staying here, and they loaded the kids back up and they came back. That was a good decision, So we always want to be aware of those type of situations, whatever it takes to keep the children safe. All right, we did it. Okay, so this is good. I wanted to be able to get through the material in 2 hours because the assessment is pretty lengthy on this particular training right here. And I also wanted you to have adequate amount of time to have discussion with your school family, discussion with your leadership team about this material. Do that comprehensive review of your policies and procedures. Make any appropriate adjustments that are needed so that you can have a safe and successful, summer and field trip season. Have fun, make the best of these experiences right there. Create those memories for both the children and adults. Just like I said at the very beginning of today, some of my best memories of working in this industry are field trips. I really, really miss it right there. If you have any questions about the material that we covered today, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me by messenger on our website in the top right-hand corner. You can email me, you can call me. Or if you need more information beyond the scope of this training material, reach out to me. Now remember, today's topic is summer and field trip safety. Most of you will also need to complete transportation safety training and then water safety training if you're taking your children to a swimming pool, either at your facility or away from your facility. So today's training did not include transportation safety training, and it did not include water safety training. So those are going to be in addition to this one right here. I do have both of these topics on my website. They are available right now. Okay, so you can do that water safety training if you haven't done it yet, and then just make sure that everyone is current on their transportation safety training if applicable. All right. Good job, everybody. This was a lot of fun. I'm super excited for all of you. Have a fantastic and successful summer. If you have any celebrations, let me know. I love to hear about your successes. If you do have anything that comes up during the summertime or on field trips and you need assistance or guidance or coaching, I'm always here for you. Give me a call, shoot me a message, shoot me an email. We can walk through the situation and give you some guidance. All right. We're going to go ahead and post the link for you to complete your assessment in the chat screen right here. So that should be popping up here in just a second. So if you're needing that certificate of completion, you can complete that assessment and get that certificate. It is a 3-hour training, so it's $15. Make sure your personal TechPeds ID is in your portal on timthetrainer.com before you complete your assessment, so that your training will be automatically uploaded into your TechPeds account. Have a great time, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I appreciate every single one of you. Talk to you soon.